Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Oliver. Today, I want to talk about Foundation Models API, which Apple announced last week at WWDC, which is going to be new in Apple Platforms versions 26, which is so much nicer to say than like all of the different numbers that we had before. But I've read through a lot of the sessions and the documentation and stuff that came out last week, and I've played with a lot of the content, but obviously not had time to integrate it into any major applications just yet. So I know Luke said I would answer a lot of questions. I can't promise I will have the answers to the questions, but I will endeavor to do so. Let's start with the elephant in the room, because Apple is kind of notorious at the moment for being behind on AI, allegedly. This is kind of one of the news articles that was in the Wall Street Journal just last week. And we've also had this, which was a comparison between Apple's new models against those from OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, and Google, where Apple's models allegedly performed the worst. So I wanted just to ask a question to start with. Does it matter? Let's first take a quick look at the number of people that are using AI. We can actually only see only about 6% of people use that every day. And 29% of people are using it at least monthly, which is kind of not kind of a predominant majority of society or the workforce these days. And out of those, actually, if we look at some of the data, we can see that it's often people are engaging with it when it's built into a product rather than going directly to something like ChatGPT and using a chatbot. These kind of products are things like Google's homepage or TripAdvisor reviews, where they have a summary feature. And so I want to hazard a question, I guess, because outside of tech, adoption can be quite slow. It's been almost 17 years now since the App Store first opened, but many organizations are still actually working out what their strategy for mobile is. And that's just their interface with the public. I don't know how many of you have internal apps at work, how good they are. The ones I've come across in a range of organizations are pretty terrible. And we generally find, as I say, that enterprise and employee-facing applications, if they even exist, are far lower quality than consumer ones. Meanwhile, according to Gartner, Gen AI is actually just starting to fall from where we have kind of what we call the peak of inflated expectations, which is where everyone is at the top of the hype circle. And so we're kind of at the point where the technology itself is reaching a bit of a period of stability. And now probably is really the time for the hard work to start, which is figuring out how we can integrate it seamlessly into our business tools and the processes that we have. And so today, I think that just brings me on to what we're going to talk about, which is the Foundation Models framework that will help us as developers to do just that with our apps. So first, just a tiny bit about me. As Luke says, I'm Oliver. I'm a lead developer at Deloitte Digital, focusing predominantly on native mobile apps. I've led teams of developers across both public and private sector clients. And last year, I was a finalist at the UK IT Industry Awards for Engineer of the Year. If you're interested, you can follow me on some of these socials as well. I have a couple of the clients here, weight and balance of aircraft and test and trace and stuff like that. So today, as I say, we'll talk about what the Foundation Models API actually is. We'll touch on some safety of generative AI and the guardrails that are actually built into the Foundation Model framework. And for those of you that know me or have seen over my previous talks, you'll know that I'm quite passionate about software safety in general. We'll cover a little bit about Apple, say, about Gen AI in the human interface guidelines that they've updated last week. And finally, we'll play with some demos and some actual code. So we'll start with foundation models. What actually are they? We can start with Wikipedia. So a foundation model is a machine learning or deep learning model trained across a vast range of data sets that can apply across a wide range of use cases. You've probably heard of several of these, and you've almost certainly used some of them as well. Even my granny's used ChatGPT, so if you haven't, I don't know where you've been living. And so the foundation models here that we're talking about with the framework really are the ones that are actually built in to Apple Intelligence, already stored on lots of our iPhones. And Apple Intelligence is the kind of the functionality or the umbrella term for a lot of these functionality that is built into iOS 18 and in iOS 26 as well. So quick refresher of how it works. A lot of the models are stored on the device. They can work offline. They're used only for your requests, and privacy is independently verified. And then also, some of the stuff works online as well with private cloud compute when they need to go back to a bigger, more substantial model. And the foundation models framework here we're talking about gives us access specifically to those on-device models, not the cloud ones. And so at the start, I talked about why no matter that Apple are behind in the race to train great AI models. But the foundation models framework is actually very Apple. They haven't just taken these models and given us access to them and just dumped them on us and said, good luck, or just given us an API that takes an input and returns a string like some of the other solutions that are out there. They've done a lot of good things. The framework is well designed, it's well implemented, and it's well documented. I guess well documented is probably one of the things that Apple is less known for, but in this case, they've done a really good job. So some of the good things that we can see from it is we get structured inputs and outputs, so we can actually use it to generate models in our code, things like structs and enums and actual types that we can specify particular ranges and things like that. So it returns type-safe resources that are kind of well used to in the Swift language. It has built-in guardrails to prevent harmful, controversial, or sensitive responses. It has clear guidance on how to extend those built-in guardrails for your use cases, context, or audience. And finally, it has clear guidance on how to provide a great user experience to your users, taking into account things like privacy, inclusion, and accessibility. So how do we use it? Let's have a look. It's pretty simple. First, we just import foundation models. We create something called a language model session. We create a prompt, something that we're going to say to the model. And then we ask for a response. And we get something back like this. Very, very simple. Let's take a look at a slightly more complex example. So here we go. We can actually customize the configuration options, so we can change the sampling to something that is a bit more non-deterministic versus deterministic. We can set the temperature so we get some more varied responses that are a little bit more left field than we'd expect from the default configuration. And we can also, as I say, generate things other than strings, right? We can actually say something like, well, actually, the response type really is this. It's a language model session response content, where content is something called generable. So what is generable? Generable is actually a Swift macro. So we can apply it to any type. So in this case, we're going to create a person model with a name and an age. So it might be something like Alex, who's 30 years old. But we might actually have some different requirements for our data. And we can easily guide the framework to ensure that each property is correct. So for example, we might want actually a proper name that's displayed in an official document with a first name and a last name. Or we might have a particular age range that we want our person to sit in. And we can also integrate with the outside world as well. So if we have more information that we might want to provide our model with, we can actually use these tools. So we might have something like a data store of users' data on the device that we want to provide the model with so that it can use that as context. Or we might have something on a remote server somewhere that we want to be able to allow the model to query as well. And we can provide those in kind of, again, a type-safe manner. And we'll have a look at a little bit more details about how to do that later on. So as Uncle Ben from Spider-Man said, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. And luckily for us as developers, Apple's done a whole bunch of thinking in this area already. So they have a page of documentation which enables us as developers to ensure that the generated outputs we get from these models are safe to display to our users. So let's go back and look at the Hello World code we wrote earlier. You'll have noticed that this is a throwing function. Why would it throw? Well, it actually throws something called a guardrail violation error. And this might occur due to any kind of unsafe response that might come back from the model. And so our job as developers really is just to handle this error and display an error to the user that something went wrong here, maybe they should try a different input. You may have come across this in some of the existing Apple Intelligence features, such as image playgrounds, where you want to generate something and the app says no. And sometimes it gets triggered by things you don't quite expect as well, which is a bit strange. Another thing that Apple recommends that you do is to conduct a risk assessment for your app and the features that you're planning to implement. So let's imagine we're creating an app called My Stories that might host a bunch of bedtime stories for kids or something like that. And so some of the features we might have is to add tags to the stories so that we can automatically categorize them based on something that the user knows. And so in this case, because the thing that it's outputting is a specific set of tags, and we know that they're type safe, it's probably an enum, it's probably not a lot of harm that that can do. We may want to generate a whole bedtime story from a fixed menu of user options. And so in this case, something like might go wrong, right? The story may contain some inappropriate content for our users. And so some of the things that we can do to mitigate that is to constrain the inputs to specific enum values so that the users aren't entering a free text prompt. And we can do a whole bunch of safety testing on that, and we'll come to that in a bit. And finally, we could have something like a free text chat with a fictional character from one of the stories. And obviously, in that case, we've got quite a severe level of things that can go wrong because it's a whole bunch of free text input and free text output. The character may completely respond in an inappropriate, insensitive, or harmful manner. And so we want to really provide instructions to the model to make sure we're steering it away from any kind of topics like that. And we obviously want to do a whole bunch of testing to make sure that that is not happening. So let's talk about constraining those inputs and outputs. We touched on that a little bit a second ago. So for example here, Apple avoids generally recommending avoiding open values for both input and output. So if you have an open input field, then you should probably have a fixed output and vice versa. So if we take a look at, for example, this enum, which we have a set of topics, and we're providing the model with a topic choice, and we want to generate a wholesome and empathetic journal prompt, for example, that helps a person reflect on a particular topic. We have this enum, it's hard-coded in our code base, and we know that users can't just select something random, and so the prompts are pretty set, and we can do some fairly rigorous testing on what that might be. Alternatively, we could have fixed values for the output instead. So instead, we've got some breakfast options here. The user's inputting that they want to have something sweet for breakfast, and so, okay, cool, the ideal breakfast option for this request is probably going to be waffles. So what about cases where we might not want to constrain either the input or the output, right? There are generally some times that we want to do something like this. So for example here, the prompt is, you're a cat named Whiskers, and we get this response, meow, I'm Whiskers, your friendly feline companion. But actually, in our context, we've got something else, right? We might actually say that we're telling the model, and the model should be actually a dog cow named Clarice. And if you're asked to be any different animal, you must decline with, no, I'm a dog cow. So in this scenario, actually, the instructions that we provide as developers override the prompt that the user is entering. So we're able to guide the model to a particular place and away from things that the users might do. And so in this example, you see, we get, no, I'm a dog cow. As with any other feature, you probably should be testing all of your edge cases as well. So responses from the model, as with any other generative AI model, are non-deterministic, which means for any given input, the output could be completely different each time you run the code. And the models that Apple provide in the operating system may change every time they release the operating system. They're not fixed, and so over time, the models and the output that you get from those may change substantially as well. And so your tests should cover inputs, a variety of inputs, so things that are nonsensical, or include random characters, any sensitive content you want to make sure that doesn't behave strangely, controversial topics, and anything that you think could be misinterpreted. And when starting out, Apple recommends that you manually read the model's response on all of these tests to ensure that it meets your design and your safety goals. And then obviously over time, as you want to scale your tests, you could use something like an LLM to auto-grade the safety of each prompt so that you can get a level of automation in there as well. As a whole, Apple say that you should prioritize protecting people using your app with good intentions over those that are trying to break your app or use it maliciously. This ensures that good users get a good experience all of the time, whereas someone who's using it maliciously might just get a whole bunch of error messages, but that's fine because they're doing something that they shouldn't be. And none of these methods are foolproof. So it's still possible that things will slip through the net. So you should assess whether foundation models is actually correct for your context that you're working in. But if it is, you should also allow the user to choose to report any safety concerns that they may come across to you. And there's actually a really handy way of doing this. So with the session, you can get the transcript from the session. You can create something called a language model feedback attachment, which is codable. So you can send that up to any API that you might have. And then you can manually submit that back to Apple through Feedback Assistant. The app review guidelines obviously aren't updated until September when the Apple Platform 26 is released, but I'd be prepared to bet anyone that allowing users to report safety concerns will be a requirement for any app that uses the foundation models framework. And you can also optionally provide a reason and explanation within the safety report as well. Cool, that's safety out of the way. Let's talk a little bit about design and the human interface guidelines themselves as well. So Apple have a few key guidance here as well, some of which is you should always ask for permission before using personal information. You should always ask for permission before performing any destructive or problematic tasks, which would usually be through some of the tools that we talked about earlier. You should help people to improve their requests when guardrails are triggered. So if you don't just get an error that says, sorry, the input was bad, actually you should guide the user towards something that might actually help them get to where they want to be. Consider offering multiple alternative results if this is appropriate, such as in the Image Playgrounds app. When you swipe through different images examples, you can allow the user to just kind of get to the answer or something that they want, because not all of the responses that come back will be perfect. And finally, factor processing time in your design. I don't know how many of you have used Gen AI as a whole, but a lot of the time you can be waiting for things to load, and so you should make sure that that is factored into all of your design and you have appropriate loading screens, just as you would with any other processing time thing that takes in place in your app. There's actually a really good implementation for this last one as well, because instead of just responding to requests, you can actually stream a list of incomplete results to your UI using the stream response API call instead. And so in this case, for partial in stream, and you go iterate over the stream and it gives you with the response as it's writing. We can have a look at that in a second. Cool. So let's take a look at some of this in action. And I thought, what better demo for mid-June than a Talk to Santa app? So let's go. Cool. So here we've got basically a Talk to Santa app. It looks very similar to iMessage that you would have come across before, sure.
Can everyone see that at the back, though?
Can everyone see that at the back? I can definitely zoom in. Can you see that? Good. Seeing some nodding. Good. So here we've got a bunch of responses. It's a scroll view and some views in that. The main thing that we care about here is this language session that we're using, and that at the moment is this thing called a basic language session, which has a model session with some instructions. The instructions are that you're Santa Claus and that you need to be kind, patient, and full of Christmas spirit. And in particular, as far as safety is concerned here, the main thing that we want to avoid is telling anyone that Santa is not real. That would be absolutely catastrophic for our users. Obviously, Santa is real. Why would anyone not believe that? So here we've got that. We can pre-warm the session when we initialize it. And basically, we send responses as we go to the UI. And so if I can get my screen mirroring working. go. Does that go any bigger? Nope, doesn't look like it. So hopefully I can type something in here, send it off, and we should get a response back from Santa. Ho ho, Merry Christmas, my dear friend. It's so wonderful to hear from you. How are you enjoying the festive season? So we can write something like, are you imaginary? And we get something back. It says, ho ho, that's quite a thought to ponder. You see, the magic of Christmas comes from believing in the wonder and joy it brings. Isn't that delightful? If you have more questions about Christmas or need a sprinkle of holiday cheer, I'm here for you. One of the things that we can do is that I haven't quite figured out how to solve yet is if you put something like, are you real? Unfortunately, instead of giving us a response back, this actually triggers the guardrail violation error, so we can see that in the Xcode window at the bottom. Ideally, I'd like that instead of triggering the guardrail violation to actually provide a response. So I might manually handle that error and provide something back instead, if we can figure that one out. At the moment, what happens is if I restart this app, we go back to just an empty app. So one of the things that we can do as well is we can use this thing called that I've built, which is persisted language session. So if we go into the content view and change which of the session models that we're using, this basically takes the transcript from the session each time you send a message, and it will send that out to just dump it in user defaults as a codable JSON string, such that every time you reopen the app, you should get the chat transcript back. So you can store the response outputs and kind of rehydrate the session as you go. So if we do something like that, you could see a response. If we then just want to kill and reopen the app, hopefully, there we go, comes back, which is good. One of the things I mentioned before as well is we can integrate something called tools into this. So in this case, one of the things that I've used and integrated with is the Google's Track Santa API. So here we've got a person tracker. It conforms to the tool protocol. And then it basically just retrieves Santa's current location and departure time from that API. It doesn't actually at the moment. It just returns Leeds because Santa's at the North Pole, and that was quite boring. But let's see if we can get that working. Hi Santa, where are you? Oh, he's at the North Pole, not in Leeds, but it's a beta. Cool. One of the other nice things that is in Xcode 26 is something called playgrounds. I don't know if you've come across this. It's useful for not just for foundation models, but it's useful for a range of things. It's similar to Xcode playgrounds or Swift playgrounds that you might have seen before, but you can populate a canvas on the side with data that comes out of whatever code that you write. So in this case, for example, we've got a model that's going to build a person profile with names and ages. And so if we run this, it's running on the phone rather than the Mac, which is a bit strange. Takes a few seconds, but what it should do is it should basically run through this code. So we'll create a session, provide it with this prompt, and then generate a range of these people. This, I think, is really useful for if you ever have placeholder content in your app and you want to generate something to display through the screenshots or something like that. Hopefully we'll get something. So we go. So we've got a list of 10 people. Can expand that out. So each of these are different people, and they should also conform to the kind of the guides that we've given along the top with the different age ranges that we've specified. Can also show you the streaming stuff that we talked about earlier as well. So here I've got another playground which is asking it to write an original joke about Swift programming. And so we've got basically a waiting for each of the partial responses in the stream. Look at the value history, and we can see that as we built each of the responses from the API, we've got all of those as they're coming out, which means we could have displayed that on the screen to the user as it's loading, and they get a nice preview of the thing as it comes out, which is nice. This also works for structs, and it will build the struct in each property in order as an optional property, so you can do it for not just strings coming out as well, which is nice. Cool. Right. Finally, I want to finish with a very short story. Let's call it a tale of two frameworks. So, Combine framework was introduced in iOS 13. And you're all probably sat here wondering, why is he talking about Combine? Combine was introduced with much fanfare and excitement. There were sessions, blogs, many social media posts, lots of love for Combine. But after a few years, Combine was left alone without being officially deprecated. Everyone stopped using it in favor of things like async await and Swift concurrency with Swift async algorithms. So Combine's been left alone without being officially deprecated. But Combine has a cousin framework called ARKit. And ARKit was also introduced with world tracking, horizontal plane detection, and a lot of fanfare around it, the same fanfare that Combine got. But over the years, it's been updated with object detection, face tracking, shared experiences, app clips, and it's received lots of love over the years. And more recently, ARKit's also been able to travel the world and visit new places with immersive experiences in Apple Vision Pro. So what's the moral of the story? We're at the beginning of a journey, and the future of foundation models is yet to be written. We don't yet know whether foundation models will be more similar to Combine or to ARKit. There's definitely some features I'd love to see in future updates over the summer as we get new betas, and over the next few years as well. So for example, the ability to input images and generate text, so I can write alt text for my images that I post to social media. And access to private cloud compute for more intensive tasks that I might want to achieve. So I'm really excited to see how this expands in Apple Platform 26 betas over the summer and over the coming years. And hopefully it will be one of Apple's more maintained frameworks, just like ARKit. So here's some resources. If you want, all of the slides are on that first QR code, including the link to the second QR code as well, so I don't know why I bothered with that one. And I recommend checking out these sessions if you want to dive into more detail. Just pause for everyone taking photos. Good. It's going up there anyway. So just a little bit of a summary of what we've covered. We talked about the new foundation models framework, access to on-device models that power Apple Intelligence. And we talked about that it's a type-safe framework where responses can be used to generate type-safe Swift types. We talked about the safety and guardrails that are actually fundamental and built into the framework itself, including guidance that Apple have given us to ensure that our generated outputs are safe for users. But the goal so that the guardrails are built in, but we also need to consider our users' context and safety in our design as well. We've talked about the fact that there's a new section on the human interface guidelines for generated AI. And we should clearly signify where we're using AI in our app, and also prioritize user control, privacy, transparency, and inclusion. I'm Oliver. Thanks for listening. I'm happy to take questions if anyone has any as well. But as I said at the start, I can't promise I'll have the answers. Mm-hmm.
First part is, do you have any control over those guardrails in terms of how strict they are? And then the second part is, does it give you any info as to why those guardrails were breached that you can give appropriate messages to the user?
Yeah, good question. I think from what I've been able to gather so far, I think the answer is no and no, in that I haven't figured out ways to trigger extra guardrails in terms of what it causes, and then the error it gets back is it just says guardrail violation, and there's no extra context inside that error. In terms of the first one, one of the things that Apple do suggest to do is to kind of read through the response that you get back yourself. And then obviously you can filter for any unexpected content or particular words that you might consider that you don't want in there. But it's obviously quite hard to do that for just words if it's a whole sentence and the word is context dependent. But yeah, I think we'll see more coming out over the next few months in terms of what's going to happen there. No worries. Mm-hmm. I think I haven't tried it. It does work on the Mac. Yeah, I think that's what the playground stuff is really useful for, just trying stuff out, and you can run it on the Mac.
You can give it extra data, you can give it tools, but how much context can those models actually take because it's quite small?
Yeah, I haven't pushed it to its limits. You can definitely provide, the tools, you can provide some macros as well with annotations of what you get. There is, as part of if I go back to the early one as well, you can limit it's almost the opposite of your question, which is probably unhelpful, but you can limit the maximum response and the maximum size of the tokens that the model uses, but there's no, I guess, opposite. You can't just raise it.
The small models on the device don't have a lot of world knowledge, so you need to give them knowledge, but they can reason about it.
Yeah.
But it's like, how much can they do? That's kind of important.
Yeah, my hope is that that's what the tools should solve, because you do it and it's lazy in the sense of it will call the API as and when you need it, rather than it needing to call the API, get a whole bunch of data and come back. The example that Apple have in their sample code is like a weather API, and so you can call that weather API and you can provide the tool with arguments based on the location that you're interested in, and so it can go off and find that. It doesn't need to know, obviously, the name of all of the locations or the weather at all of those locations. It will just go and fetch what it needs. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Two questions. One following on with Mark's. When it comes to those toolings, can you plug in things like MCPs and things like that, or is it completely bespoke?
It is bespoke, but I assume you can write custom code that would incorporate those things, because it's just Swift code, so you can pull in whatever you want. But yeah, I think it would be custom code that you'd have to write in order to integrate those things.
So then, and I appreciate this is probably not a question for you, but maybe more thought, but this is great if you're in iOS land.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us are building products that are cross-platform.
Yeah.
And everything else, right? So when it comes to your story and your comparison of frameworks,
yeah.
it feels like it's got one of those directions in mind, because it's not going to be replicable on multiple platforms, so the same sort of support and the same sort of process, same sort of functional design. It sounds great if we're building Mac apps or whatnot, but in the mobile space, I think it's going to be more challenging.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it depends on obviously all sorts of context, right? It depends what your organization's policy is. I've worked with organizations in the past that have Android only and iOS only devices where they issue them as two people, and so if you're in that world where you're iOS only, I guess you could use this, but if you're in the Android only or you've got a mixed estate, then that's not going to work. My hope is that Google provides something similar, or will provide something similar at some point, and it may be that you want to do the similar kinds of processes but implement them differently. The obviously advantage with all of the on-device stuff is it works offline. It's very user privacy focused, and you only kind of consume the data that you need, rather than it having to store a whole bunch of context and information about the user on a server, which feels like a good place to be heading towards as a mobile community. And that's where I'm kind of advocate for, and like other talks that I've done with digital identity and other stuff like that, where we store users' data on device and not on cloud. But yeah, I think it very much depends on your business context. Cool.
What are the different kinds of foundation model? I don't know if you mentioned at the start which one this is. Are there other ones as well?
So at the moment there's it's either I think it's a struct with a static property called like model. It only has one that's called default at the moment, but my expectation is that will be expanded at some point, because otherwise why would they have that? Like, why would it have been built that way?
Because you don't want to bloat the device though, right?
Yeah,
Shitloads of models.
for sure. And I think as I say, there's some things that it doesn't do yet, like allow you to process image inputs and things like that. I think it may well be that they have different kind of models that you will be able to use in the future, and there are definitely other models that they use themselves. So I think it's probably just a case of they've kind of really thought about trying to get the API into a nice state where you can do the type safe stuff and other things. And like, it's very Apple to take their time and only release stuff as they've built it and really thought about it, versus obviously other companies that would just throw things out there and let you kind of see their journey, and it's very, very open.
A follow on from that then. So is there any indication at the moment that they will allow you to supply your own model? Can you initialize the session with a model, for example, rather than just being given the default one?
Yeah, no. I think there is in the human interface guidelines, there's a bunch of guidance on things that are outside of foundation models, but I think the expectation in those contexts is that you would provide that model yourself, you'd write the code and you'd write the framework yourself that sit around it. So it would be a thing that you can definitely do on device, but it would be your own model, which means you obviously have to fill your app resources up with that model, which could potentially be kind of a few gigabytes in size, and it would affect potentially whether users choose to download your app or not. But that's the benefit of the foundation models framework stuff, is that it's already on the device for users that are opted into Apple Intelligence, and so you don't have to download an extra thing.
Right, yeah, that's the same actually question. Is there tools to extend existing models with some kind of non-publicly available knowledge?
Not yet in terms of customizing the model itself, but obviously the tools that you can provide to it to call APIs and access external resources, obviously they can be used to expand the context of that model itself.
One last one from Fido this time. What does the pre-warm function do?
It pulls the model into RAM, so it's not sat on disk, which means it's much quicker to start responding to things as you start using it. Does that make sense? Cool.
Okay, thank you very much, Oliver.
No worries.